Welcome to Lesson 3 of the Strategic Planning course by BSC Designer. In this lesson, we'll discuss how an organization can formulate a good strategy. First of all, what is a strategy? Intuitively, we understand that it is a kind of plan, something that helps to address complex challenges and lead our organization to desired outcomes. In the introductional part, I've mentioned the Strategy Safari book, where at least 10 different approaches to strategy were introduced. If we summarize the most common ideas about strategy, we will have these key components. A strategy includes an analysis of the challenge, the answer to the why question, the rationale. A strategy includes a hypothesis about the solution for the challenge, what we are going to do about it. Finally, a good strategy explains how exactly we are going to do this, an action plan formulated according to the analysis and proposed solution. Another important thought is that strategy is always an educated hypothesis. We do our best to come up with a strategy, but there is never a guarantee that it will work out as expected. The quality of strategy is very subjective. A good strategy is based on deep analysis of the current situation and suggests a comprehensive and coherent response plan. A plan that takes into account different points of view and suggests solutions that support each other. These properties of strategy open a door to numerous business frameworks that help us to look at strategy from different perspectives and formulate diverse strategies. In BSC Designer, we reviewed the most popular strategic planning frameworks. You can find the results of this review in the article called Comparison of Strategic Planning Models and Frameworks. Besides reviewing frameworks in general, we analyzed each framework in detail. The most popular frameworks are also available as templates in BSC Designer software. What are these frameworks and what's their role in strategic planning? Let's have a look at this table. In the first column, we have listed different frameworks. In the first row, you will find the strategic planning steps that we discuss in this course. As you can see, each of the frameworks has its application area in the context of strategic planning, of course. The frameworks like Balance Scorecard, OKR or Hoshin Kanri have something to suggest for all steps of strategic planning, while other frameworks like SWOT, VRIO or PESTEL mostly focus on the strategy formulation and partially on the strategy description steps. All frameworks that we reviewed add value to the strategic planning process, to the strategy formulation process. In other words, all these frameworks help to look at the challenges of the organization from different points of view. Let's do a quick review of the frameworks and discuss how they contribute to the strategy formulation. Balance Scorecard framework. The main tool of the Kaplan and Norton Balance Scorecard framework is a strategy map with 4 perspectives. How does a Balance Scorecard help to formulate a strategy? The framework suggests following a certain logic. We need to define the financial or stakeholder outcomes. that we want to achieve. Then we need to define the needs of the customers that our organization have to satisfy to achieve those financial outcomes. In the internal perspective, we formulate the challenges that we need to solve internally to satisfy the needs of the customers. Finally, in the learning and infrastructure perspective, we focus the learning force of the organization as well as discuss infrastructures that need to be implemented. Once the strategy is formulated, the framework will help us to describe it in detail by mapping goals, defining cause and effect connections, aligning goals with leading and logging metrics, defining action plans. The Balanced Scorecard is one of the most popular frameworks for strategy execution. BSC Designer software, the software tool that we will use in practical parts, supports this framework natively. To get started with this framework, I recommend these two articles: the advantages and disadvantages of Balanced Scorecard framework as an overview, and 4 perspectives of the Balanced Scorecard as a detailed guide to the framework. OKR Framework. OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. This framework is less prescriptive in the context of strategy formulation. The framework suggests focusing on few important objectives and defining them better with the performance metrics, key results. On the first step of OKR process, an organization needs to formulate strategy by answering a few questions, similar to ones that we discussed at the beginning of this lesson. What matters? Where are we now? Where do we want to go? How can we get there? What are the global and local objectives? What results do we expect from achievement of the objectives? OKR is an excellent, lightweight framework for strategic planning with the focus on cascading and execution steps. In the reference section, I share the link to the article where we discuss OKR in detail. Hoshin Kanri framework. This framework suggests a waterfall approach to strategy formulation and description. The process is visualized on the diagram called X matrix. According to Hoshin Kanri, the goals need to be defined following this scheme: long-term objectives first, annual objectives that support long-term objectives, short-term goals, priorities or activities in the terminology of this framework, and finally, key performance indicators. Similar to Hoshin Kanri, there is a framework called OGSM. This framework suggests different names for the goals, respectively objectives, goals, strategy, and measures. In the context of strategy definition, this framework is very similar to Hoshin Kanri. Management by objectives. The Management by Objectives framework, MBO, was one of the first strategy execution frameworks. It's not as sophisticated as Balanced Scorecard or Hoshin Kanri, but on the level of strategy execution, its simple approach adds value. In the context of strategy definition, this framework introduced certain criteria for a good objective. According to MBO, objectives have to be ordered according to their importance. Objectives have to be quantitative and realistic. Objectives have to be in line with organizational policies and compatible with each other. Three Horizons Framework. The McKinsey's Three Horizons Framework addresses innovation planning challenges. In the context of strategy formulation, it suggests prioritizing innovation ideas according to three time frames, horizons. Now, something that an organization needs to do today, for example, innovate its core business, near-term future, innovation that address the challenges in the comfort zone, future, focusing on trends that might soon become disruptive. The application area of this framework depends on the business domain of your organization. In general case, the time horizons need to be adjusted. For example, in technological niches, the time is no longer a good denominator, as disruptive changes might happen in a short-term period. SWOT+S. The SWOT framework doesn't need any introduction. At BSC Designer, we analyzed the possibility of using SWOT directly with a strategy map. We called it a SWOT plus strategy. The strategy formulation potential of SWOT is about converting and matching. We can come up with new strategic hypotheses by converting weaknesses in strengths, converting threats into opportunities, and finally by matching strengths with opportunities. In the reference for this lesson, you will find a link to the article about SWOT+S framework. VRIO analysis. VRIO analysis helps to look at the potential of certain resource to help achieve sustainable competitive advantage. The diagram summarizes what VRIO analysis is about. We analyze various resources, step one. We check if those resources are valuable, rare, immutable, and organized, is actually used. If the answer to all four is yes, then we have a sustainable competitive advantage and can formulate our strategy around improving it. If the answer is no, then the strategy can be formulated around exploring the potential of the resource and eventually converting it into the sustainable competitive advantage. What resource in your organization has a potential to become a sustainable competitive advantage? What can your team do for this? These are the questions that will help you to define a strategy with this framework. 7S. The 7S framework is another strategy formulation framework. In this case, a business challenge is analyzed using 7 factors, the S's. These 7 factors are divided into hard S, strategy, structure, system, and soft S's, shared values, skills, style, stuff. By following the S of the framework, we analyze this strategic hypothesis from different points of view. Do you have an idea? Analyze this idea with different S in mind. What skills do you need? Skills. What management style needs to be applied? Style. What values does this idea imply? In the reference, I shared the link to the article where we discuss the use of 7S in practice. PESTEL. PESTEL analysis and its variations refers to the analysis of external factors. What are those factors? Political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal. What economic and social trends might impact your organization? Are we prepared for upcoming legal changes? What technologies will change our market? Answers to these questions will help to formulate strategic hypotheses and add a perspective of external factors to the strategy. In the reference, you will find an example of using PESTEL analysis for strategic planning with some specific steps to follow. Gap analysis. Gap analysis helps to find strategic hypotheses by focusing on the difference between the expected and actual performance. The process of this analysis includes 3 steps. 1. Gap identification, understanding where the organization is now and how its actual performance is compared to the expected performance. 2. Root cause analysis, understanding the reasons for the gap. 3. Developing the improvement plan. Here is an example of gap analysis in action. This month we have got 20% more leads than expected. That's a gap, something unexpected. What were the reasons for the gap? Did some marketing channel work better than you expected? Should you add a new strategic hypothesis to the marketing strategy to explore this channel more? Pareto analysis. I'm sure you heard about 80-20 rule. In the context of strategy formulation, Pareto analysis can be applied to prioritize strategic hypotheses. We need to compare hypotheses using resources needed to try them versus expected benefits. In other words, Pareto analysis suggests your team evaluate the cost-benefit potential of their ideas and focus on the most promising ones. Constraints analysis. Another approach to strategy formulation is suggested by the constraint analysis or theory of constraints. In this case, to generate a strategic hypothesis, we're looking at the constraints or the bottlenecks. A strategic hypothesis in this case is about estimating the impact of these constraints on ultimate business performance and suggesting a response plan. Prioritization frameworks. Strategy is about making choices. While the resources of an organization are limited, the number of strategic hypotheses is limited only by the imagination of your team. A good strategy works as a filter for new ideas. What kind of filters do we have in strategic planning? In Balanced Scorecard, we have 3 strategic themes that are similar to Porter's generic strategies. There are also some popular prioritization diagrams like Eisenhower matrix, value complexity model, Kanri model, affinity diagram. Similar to SWOT, VRIO, and PESTEL analysis, they add value on the strategy definition step. In the reference for this lesson, I shared the link to the article where we discussed the prioritization frameworks in detail. Practical challenge for this lesson. We have discussed what a good strategy is. We've talked about using various business frameworks to formulate strategies. That's a lot of information to assimilate. My suggestion for you is to review the comparison table of the frameworks and pick 1 or 2 frameworks that resonate with your current business challenges. Try them with your team and formulate several strategic hypotheses. We will use them in the next step of the course. When formulating those hypotheses, don't forget about the components of a good strategy. The analysis and its results formulated as a rationale, the solution for the challenge, and the possible action plan to implement the solution.